Hasmoneans were fighting for Olympics. The Greeks were against health. They ate sufganiyot and latkes, and it was the Hasmoneans who were there to protect our physical health. The first night of Hanukkah every year, the president of Israel invites Israel's top athletes to light Hanukkah candles in his home, because that's what it symbolizes. That's the aspect that the early Zionists found that they could cull or manufacture within Hanukkah. So it's easy for us to laugh at those who clearly don't have an accurate understanding of Hanukkah. The question is whether we do. I want to share a personal story that happened to me. When I was Shana Aleph in Yeshiva in Israel, we had off for Shabbat Chanukah, and I went to my uncle. My uncle davened in the Grosh Shul in Bayit Vagan. How many of you have ever been in that shul, in the Grosh Shul in Bayit Vagan? So the Rav got up, and he figured he could say what he was about to say because he was saying it in Yiddish. So if you understood what he was saying, you would probably agree. I went to Yeshiva in Borough Park, so I spoke Yiddish, but, went off the derech, so to speak. So this is what he said. He said, the Greeks were a unique challenge to the Jewish people because, like Esav, they presented themselves as religious, right? Sayid b'fiv. The Yevanim are trying to trick us into some new form of Jewish identity. If you take the word Yevani, and you take the tzaddik of Sayid b'fiv of Esav, and you put the tzadi before Yevani, what word do you get? Tzioini. And he said the Tzioinim are trying to do the same thing. They're trying to change our Jewish identity, and that's why we have to watch out for them. Now, many people hear something that goes against your grain, you immediately say they're wrong and they're crazy. When I hear something that goes against my grain, I start thinking maybe they're right. I soul search. And I was thinking, is it true? So first of all, it's definitely true. The secular Zionists definitely tried to change what Judaism meant. The question is, what about religious Zionists? What about me? I remember when I was in Yeshiva University, there were a bunch of protesters who were protesting against Rav Soloveitchik, claiming that he was a Hellenist. He had been influenced by Western culture. Clearly, they were right. He had been influenced. And if you take it back, the Gra said the same thing about the Rambam, no less. The Gra felt the Rambam's shittas about shadim, about black magic, were not genuine Jewish opinions. They were influenced by Greek philosophy. What I'm trying to show is that it's not such a simple question to answer. Who's on which side of the equation? And that's the issue I want to address today, to understand what was the real essence of the struggle, and how can we make sure before we begin Hanukkah and have jam donuts, and have latkes and everything else to make sure that we're celebrating on the right side of things. And frankly, people, Jews, if there still are, who live totally cut off from the outside world. I don't know if there's still people in Stanford Hill who live that way. But if there are, the question is less challenging for them. Because if you have nothing to do with the outside world, you're not influenced by it. But if we want to live as part of interfacing with the broader world, we have to ask ourselves and make sure that we're taking the best from that world and contributing the best we have to that world without losing our identity. So when one asks, what was the nature of the struggle with the Greeks? There's two ways to look at it. One is historical, to try and understand what the Greeks were thinking, what the Maccabees were thinking. And I remember in Yeshiva University, there was a professor of Greek, Latin, ancient history, a religious person. His name was Louis Feldman. Anyone that heard of him? He used to give every year a yahrzeit shiur on Hanukkah for the Greeks. And he'd give a yahrzeit shiur, he would talk about Greek wisdom and what it stood for and what it didn't stand for. And that, of course, is valuable. But when we want to understand the takeaway message, so here we look at how Chazal understood it. How did Chazal understand what the essence of the struggle was, which, whether its degree of historical accuracy or not, is not important. What's the message that they wanted us to take away from that struggle and appreciate for generations in defining our identity? So looking at this, if we take a look at page 1, the famous Gemara of Ma'eh Chanukah, where it tells the story, we're all familiar with the story. Gemara concludes on the last line that in a later year, they established the days of Hanukkah as Yomim Tovim, Behalel V'Hodah. Now this is very interesting. If you look carefully, it doesn't say they established the days as Yomim Tovim on which we're meant to say Hallel. It says they established the days as Yomim Tovim with Hallel, through Hallel. This point is made by the Sfat Emet in the Gemara there. Al Yedei Halel v'Hodah Asu Hayomim Tovim Halalu. And you see how important the process of establishing the days was from the part of Al Anisim we say on Hanukkah that's absent on Purim. If you look at the left part of the sheet, you see the Al Anisim of Purim. The right side, you have Hanukkah. I've underlined the similar descriptions. There's an add-on Hanukkah. V'kavu shmonat yimei Hanukkah elu lehodos u'lehalal l'Shem Chagam. Doesn't say that by Purim. You see that the process of establishing the days is an important part of what we need to commemorate. And obviously the question is, why is it important? And why are Hallel and Hodah so central, not just as expressions, but as the basis? Now, if we look at Hallel and Hodah, of course, Hallel is something we're familiar with from all the Yom Tovim. It seems to have a unique expression in Hanukkah. The Rambam mentions the laws of Hallel and Hilchos Hanukkah. Interestingly, I don't know that we would have thought that, maybe Sukkot. But Hodah is really unique to Hanukkah. If you had to choose one element that we find by Hanukkah and not the other Chagim, Hodah. I mean, it's always appropriate to be Modeh, but the essence of Hanukkah is established through Hodah. And this is question number one. Why? To appreciate this a little bit more, let's recognize that we find the concept of Hodah in other places describing the Greeks and our struggle with the Greeks. For example, towards the bottom of page 1, we have the Mishnah in Midos, a Masechta that has nothing to do with personal traits and everything to do with the measurements of the Beis HaMikdash, where it describes the soreg, which was the fence up to which non-Jews could walk on the Harabayit but not go beyond. The Greeks made 13 holes in this fence. When the Hasmoneans retook the Harabayit, they refenced the holes and they instituted 13 hishtachavoyot, prostrations when you went by those holes. The Rambam, when he describes this in his Pirush HaMishnah, he says, "Kisha adam magia lepirtza meosan hapratzos mishtachav el Hashem umodeh al krisos malchus yavan." He would bow down and be modeh for the destruction of the Greeks who attacked the Jews. So Hodah is something we find within the conflict with the Greeks in general. Another interesting thing you see here in this Mishnah and this Rambam is the interweaving of Hodah with Hishtachavoyim. We're, of course, familiar with that from our Tefillah. Where do we have that in our Tefillah? We say Modim and we Mishtachaveh. We see how important that is from the Gemara in Bava Kama Daf Tet Zayin, the next source, which says, a person's spinal column turns into a snake 7 years after their death. Bahani mili de lo kara b'modim. The bowing at modim seems to mean something that connects between the two. Of course, it's interesting that it turns into a snake of all things. We'll get back to that. And we see this also in our tefillah of Aleinu L'Shabach. Aleinu L'Shabach is such an important tefillah. It's always been important. It's always been a topic of conflict and of attack, censorship in the goyim around us. You can see in the Jewish Museum in Rome, there's an ancient siddur that has Aleinu, and there's a red line running through the words Shehem Mishtachavim Lehevel Varik, but the red line has faded over time, and you can now see the words once again. When I grew up, most of the siddurim didn't have Shehem Mishtachavim Lehevel Varik in them. It was still making a comeback. And I remember when it came back, I was like, what is this? Where did it come from? And then it was in brackets. It should be in bold, right? The contrast, the belief, and again, in today's relativistic world where no one's allowed to believe that they're right? That concept of Shehem Mishtach Lehevel Varik v'anachnu korim. So the contrast is two things: who we're praying to, Shehem Mishtach Lehevel Varik, anachnu lefnei melech malchei hamlachim HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but also how we serve. Hem Mishtachavim, anachnu korim u'mishtachavim u'modim. Prostration can be some kind of ritual. It can also be part of an expression of Hodah, which is what it's meant to be for the Jewish people. We still haven't explained why, we still haven't explained the significance, but we're understanding what it's meant to be. So it's emphasized on Hanukkah, but it's a broader theme. If you look at the top of page 2, we can see sources for the importance of both Hodah and Hishtachavoyah. The source for the importance of Hishtachavoyah may surprise people. When Avram wanted to explain to his Na'arim where he and Yitzchak were going, he didn't say, I'm going to kill Yitzchak. He said, you guys stay here with the donkey. V'ani v'hanar nelcha adko v'nishtachave v'neshuva alechem. Ishtachavoya is the broad phrase which represents Avodas Hashem. Hodah, we have in Sefer Daniel. But together with Ishtachavoya, when he describes his tefillah, he says, B'yomahu barech al birchohi, went down on my knees, u'mitzalei u'modeh kami Elohe. Just one more source before we move on to the next topic. We, of course, know how important Hodah is from the fact that we begin our day with it. The first word a Jew is supposed to say in the morning is modeh, modeh ani. So the point I'm trying to make is it's critical, central within Hanukkah, but it's a theme that's important to us all year round. And so it's appropriate for us to appreciate what Hodah means and why, and what we should be reflecting when we do so. Okay, so the first question we had in summary is, why is Hanukkah connected to Hodah? I think we can answer this question by taking a look at how Chazal understood the conflict that Hodah is coming to commemorate. So I want to share two sources here on page 2. The first one is this wire is, maybe we'll put it behind you. Did you have the way here? Yeah. Okay, good. No, we're in a better place. Okay. So the first source is a very famous medrash which talks about the different stages of creation being parallel to the different golios of the Jewish people. For example, v'hinei tohu vavohu, that's Golus Madai, right? The Choshech al pnei Tahom, that's Golus Yavan. Shehechshicha einehem shel Yisrael b'gzerotehen. They darkened the eyes of the Jewish people with their decrees. What was the decree that darkened our eyes? Shehaita omeret lehem kitfu al keren hashor she'ein lechem chelik b'elokei Yisrael. Very famous medrash. They forced us to write on the horn of an ox that we have no portion in the God of Israel, which is a little bit of an internal contradiction, oxymoron. We have no portion in the God of Israel. I mean, there's a concept of God of Israel, but we have no portion in it. Again, you wonder what are we missing here in understanding what was at the heart of it. And let's also speak about the way the conflict is described in Al-Anisim. This source is more than just saying that the Greeks were trying to steer us from Torah and mitzvah. Torah is described as Torah Techa. And the mitzvot here focus particularly on chukim, which are described as chuke ritzonecha. So the question again is, what are we not appreciating here? So to move on to a third aspect, which will be the beginning of the answer, many of the 20th century Gedolei Torah philosophers struggled with this question. Rav Hutner, Rav Soloveitchik, Rav Kook have lengthy writings about understanding the line between Hasmoneans and Mityavnim. It's understandable that they would, by the way, right? Because what all of them shared was a very deep, broad secular education. If you're studying in the University of Berlin, you want to understand which side of the fence you're on. And the tzibur they were speaking to needed to understand it. And all of them go back to the beginning of the diversion of the divergence between Jews and religion in general, and the Greeks and Western culture in general. And they go back to Shem and Yafet. As we know, all of humanity descends from Noach, but then his 3 sons is where the world repopulates itself. And in Parshas Bereishis, in Noach, it describes how all the children had their children and all the nations were formed, the 70 nations, in Bereishis Perek Yud Aleph, Perek Yud. So we descend from these 2 sons of Noach, and we find a story about the 2 sons in Bereshit Perek Tet. Right after the Mabul, Noach plants a vineyard, gets drunk, Chum takes advantage of him. His 2 sons, Shem and Yafet, progenitors of the Jewish people and religion as a whole, and the Greeks and Western civilization as a whole, take a cloak and cover their father. Noach wakes up, he curses the descendants of Chum, and then he blesses Shem and Yafet in Psukim Chaf Vav and Chaf Zayin. But what's interesting is that he doesn't bless them together. Each one receives a separate, disparate bracha. And Shem definitely seems to have the better bracha. Noach begins with shame, ends with shame, mentions Yefet in between, and hinges Yefet's bracha on the presence within the tent of shame. Baruch Hashem Elokei Shem, he begins. Yafta Elokim liyefet v'yishkon ba'olei Shem. The obvious question is, why is there any distinction made between the two sons who helped him? And if a distinction is made, why this way? Why this preferential treatment? Rashi quotes the Gemara in Sanhedrin Daf Ayin, which makes two important points. First of all, it makes a beautiful diuk in the pasuk. If you look back at pasuk of Gimel, the pasuk that describes their action, you see that most of the pasuk uses verbs that are plural. Vayasimu al Shechem shnehem, vayelchu achoranit, vayechasu et ervat avihem. But the first verb in the pasuk is singular. Vayikach shem vayefet et asimla. So the Gemara says, you see from here that Shem initiated the mitzvah. Okay. The Gemara then continues, Rashi quotes it. That's why Shem's children were awarded the mitzvah of tzitzit. You wonder, what's the connection? Maybe you could say he did a mitzvah with a beged, so he did a mitzvah with a beged, but that's going to break down when you see to what Yefet received. What did Yefet receive? The mitzvah of kfura. For joining the show today, we're not going to send you away empty-handed. You receive a consolation prize of kfura. And you wonder, where does this come from? What kind of reward is that? And how does it connect to what happened here? But the broader question is, okay, Shem began the action. Why is that so significant? So give him a little extra cherry on top. Why is Yefet considered less? Because Shem began the action. So the aforementioned great rabbis and thinkers, each one formulates it differently, but they all say the following idea. They say Yefet's raison d'etre, his characteristic was the appreciation of beauty. Yaft Elokim liyefet. And Judaism believes in the significance of what man finds beautiful. By the way, if you look at the bottom of page 2, I quote here the Netziv, the Hamek Dover, who says a little bit differently, but also already speaks about this contrast between Shem and Yefet. But let's continue on page 3. Judaism recognizes the significance of beauty. The Mishnah in Megillah Daf Chet Amud Bet says that Sifrei Torah, Sifrei Kodesh must be written in Hebrew. Rav Shimon ben Gamliel says they can also be written in Greek. And the Gemara explains, because it says Yaft Elokim liyefet v'yishkon ba'olei Shem, Dvarav shel Yefet yiyu ba'olei Shem. Holiness can express itself in Greek because it's beautiful. Shamshon Raphael Hirsch has a beautiful diuk in the way God's world, the trees God planted, are described in Bereshis Perek Beis. Vayatzmach Hashem Elokim min ha'adama, kol eitz nechmad lemara, v'tov lema'achal. The first thing we're told about the trees is that they looked good. Is that what's important? What the trees looked like? Rav Shamshon Raphael Hirsch says yes. God imbued us with a sense of beauty. There's value in that. There are things that are beautiful, and we should appreciate that we see them as beautiful. So where's the catch? The catch is, the danger is that beauty is in the eye of the beholder. It's subjective. And I always like to tell the story of my wife and I we visited Paris, and we went to the Museum of Modern Art there. Does anyone know what it's called? The Pompidou. The Pompidou Museum of Modern Art, which before you enter the building, you see right away is meant to be Ifcha Mistavra. To those who learn Gemara, it's meant to be the opposite of whatever you think. The building is built with the piping on the outside. Okay, there's a message there. At that time, when we walked in, it was many years ago, the first painting we saw was a canvas with a sneaker shoved through it and multicolored paints all over it. There was a curator there. I said, tell me, what is this? Oh, this is one of our best paintings. I said, really? I said, how much does it go for? This is 30 years ago, $100,000. I really felt bad about the fact that I didn't save my old sneakers. Where I grew up in Brooklyn, when you finish with your sneakers, you would tie them together and throw them over the electric wires. If you only had one, you attach it to your exhaust. Think of what I could have made with those sneakers and a few cans of paint. I must admit, I had absolutely no idea what that art meant. I couldn't make heads or tails from it. But someone thought it would look good. You can't disagree with it. As we say in Hebrew, im tam vareach, ein lehitvakeach. When it comes to taste and smell, you can't debate. Someone feels it's beautiful, to them it's beautiful. Man is placed in the center because man is the arbiter of beauty. And when we think about things the Greeks emphasized, nudity, the beauty of the physical body, athleticism, the homocentric view of the universe that put Earth and man by association in the center. It took over 1,000 years to correct that mistake because human beings are biased. The Greeks believe in God, but they're like man. They have an anthropomorphic mythological understanding of God. And today we don't necessarily have the philosophical understandings of it, but man is in the center of a world of iPads, iPhones, or in Hebrew, bisli, kefli, prili, etc. The danger, of course, is that when it's in the eyes of the beholder, it can get warped. An excellent example of this, of course, were the Nazis, German civilization of the 20th century. Powerful poem by Alterman, who was one of Israel's leading poets in the generation of the founding of the state of Israel. He writes, "V'rabba de'aga letmunot u'psalim, v'otzrot amanut pen yuftzatzu, ach otzrot amanut shel rashei olalim, el kirot u'kfishim yurutzatzu." In English, how much concern the Nazis had not to bomb museums and destroy artworks, but the art of human beings, of young children, they would smash at walls and roads. So again, when it's in the eye of the beholder, you can decide this is beautiful and important, and this is totally worthless. Rabbi Chanan Wasserman has a piece that he writes. It was a speech of his, not coincidentally, to the rabbinic seminary in Berlin in the 1920s. And his point of departure is the end of Sefer Kohelet, Sof Davar Hakol Nishma, Et Elokim Yira, Ve'et Mitzvotav Shemor, Ki Zeh Kol Ha'adam. And he asks, why is that the totality of man? Rav Chanan says that without Yirat Elokim, a person can descend to the level of an animal. You can have intelligence, but you can live your life like an animal. And he says, you can be even more dangerous than an animal. Because if a person owned a pet lion, would you let him walk around your house? I don't know that we would own a pet lion, but if we did, we wouldn't let him walk around. Says Rav Chanan, human beings are much more dangerous. They can do much more damage. He goes, there's one thing that holds them, that shackles them, the limitation of Yirat Elokim. And he says that a culture can be as broad, as deep, as moral and ethical as they think they are, but without these shackles can kill millions of people. And clearly he was referring to the place he was speaking in, and he connects this in the last few lines to Avram's response to Avimelech, who asked him, why did you suspect me and lie about your wife? And Avram's famous words were, Rak ein yirat elokim b'makom hazeh. Rabbi Chanan explains, you have ethics, you have morality, you lack one thing, the basis of yirat elokim. And when you lack that basis, it's unreliable. And we're still learning the hard way in our world, just how unreliable it is. Judaism and religion in general disagree with this particular point. We believe in beauty and we believe in the wisdom that can come from the world around us. But we believe that our values come from a higher authority. Truth comes from a higher authority. Direction comes from a higher authority. Or to paraphrase the Medrash, Chachma bagoyim ta'amin. Wisdom, understanding. Torah bagoyim. Direction, al ta'amin. And it's that distinction to realize that man can and is meant to understand a lot and appreciate a lot, but the values come from something above. And this is how Chazal saw the conflict. The Greeks were fine with the Jewish people having their cultural wisdom and customs. You want to eat kreplach? You have your wisdom? We'll have a Department of Jewish Studies in every one of our universities. But it's part of a broader world of relative thinking. The concept of your wisdom being God's wisdom and thus trumping other wisdom, Torasecha, you have a special relationship with God and therefore are different than other people. You can walk further in the RABBI and others can't. Right? That concept that you can have, that people can be holier, right? That they can be closer to God, that their wisdom can come from a higher source. Again, it sounds almost like we're talking about the conversation in today's world. And it's not coincidental because the themes remain the same, the tensions remain the same, even though the names of the groups change. I mean, names of the Jewish people don't change, but those around us change. It's very much a similar conflict. You know, the traditional values under siege because of the concept of differentness being racism. believing ato v'chartanu. It's very hard for people trying to relativize Judaism to deal with our traditions and our tefillah and our mitzvos and etc. And this began with the Greeks. And I didn't mention this before, but one of the questions is, why did the Greeks defile the oil? Just spill it out if you don't want it to be oil. Throw it out. Tumah also is something that's irrational. Doesn't make sense to man. They could say to the Jews, here, you have the oil, use it. What does it mean it's tameh? Rambam writes, bottom of page 4, Davar barur v'galu she'atumos ve'ataros gzeres hakosavhein. Einon midvarim shedato shel adam achrato. V'arein michlal chukim. Chukei ritzonecha. Chok is something we don't understand. We observe it because it's God's will, because we're committed to a higher will, to a higher authority. Rashi speaks about this last source on page 4. In the beginning of Parshat Chukat Zot, Chukat HaTorah, he says, Lefisha Satan ve'umas ha'olam, monin es Yisrael lomar, ma mitzvah zot, ma tam yesh ba. Lefikach katav b'chuka, gezerah hi milfanai, ve'ein lecha rishus lahara achareh. There's so much to unpack in this Rashi. First of all, why does Rashi talk about the Satan and the Umas ha'olam attacking us? Are they two armies? The Lubavitcher Rebbe said beautifully, there are two ways people feel undermined. You're undermined because of what the world thinks of you, and you're undermined because of what you think of you. You only care about what the world thinks of you when you're eaten out on the inside. A person is confident themselves in their beliefs, is immune. They're confident within themselves. You can translate this for yourselves into the London Mitzias, but I'll tell you, growing up in New York, I have a Talmud who lives on the west side of Manhattan. He told me the story. I was walking with a friend. They were wearing baseball caps. You know how the kids wear these baseball caps. And they bumped into a famous Jewish comedian, Jackie Mason. I heard of him. So they say, Jackie Mason, you're so funny. Great to meet you. He says to them, you must be a yeshiva bacher. They said to him, how do you know? He said, only yeshiva boys are desperate enough to wear baseball caps in the middle of the streets. Because we're not confident, not now maybe because of danger. But there was no danger in the west side of New York then. It's being insecure. Just a few blocks south in Manhattan, you have a chassid wearing his bekasha, with his tzitzis on top of his bekasha, with his white cricket socks up to his knees, with remnants of last night's dinner and yesterday's lunch, on the tzitzis, and he's walking with his shaved head and his payas out, and nobody looks at him because he doesn't care. It starts with our confidence about ourselves, our belief in our values. And Rashi concludes with a very powerful phrase, Ein lecha reshut lahara achareha. Now, we often mistranslate the word reshut as permission. Reshut harabbim means the domain of the public. Ein lecha reshut lahara achareha means it's above your pay grade. It's above your domain. There are things that are not about whether you identify with them or not. The nafkamina of all this was the amount of time it took Shem versus Yefes to react. Shem sees something. It's wrong. Why is it wrong? It's wrong because God tells us we respect our parents, we don't embarrass people. He acts right away. Yefet has to process it. It has to go through his value system. He has to think about whether it's wrong in his eyes. It takes him a little longer to respond. And what's the reward? What is the aspect of our existence that's most challenging to our belief in our own beauty? Death. When a person dies, they decompose. There was a show called Bones. Anyone ever watched the show Bones about a forensic anthropologist? My wife likes to watch Bones. Each episode starts, they show you a decomposing corpse. Oh, you look away. God gave Yefet a gift, burial. The burial of man can protect us from having to see man in his decomposition. Shem got a gift, something that could constantly remind him of what's above him, the values that are above him, that he's committed to. And what's that gift that constantly reminds us? Tzitzis. Each of them got something to reinforce their values. So this is the conflict with the Greeks. Hasmoneans are victorious, and they want to institute a Yom Tov. It's a chiddush to institute a Yom Tov, right? Meaning, who are you to make a Yom Tov? They instituted through Hallel and Hodah. The The Greeks made holes in the fence that distinguished between Jews and non-Jews. The Hasmoneans fixed the fence and instituted prostration integrated with hodah, the recognition of values that come from above us, of differentness, of something beyond our ability to understand. And maybe this is a moment to stop for a minute and appreciate what the word hodah means. If you take a look at the next page, page 5, the tefillah of modim seems redundant. Modim anachnu lach, shato Hashem Elokeinu v'Elokei avotenu li'olam v'oed tzorcheinu v'gein yishenu ato l'dor v'dor nodeh lecha u'nisaper tefilotech. Why is hodah mentioned twice? Rav Kook in his Pirush on the Siddur Olat Riyah points out that the word hodah means two things. It means to thank. It also means what? To acknowledge, to recognize, to admit. If I say you owe me $100 and you admit to owing me $50, you are a modeh b'miktsas. You're not thanking me, but you're admitting, you're recognizing. It's interesting that the one Hebrew word has both meanings because they're related. A real thanks is to someone who helped you in a way you couldn't help yourself. I remember many years ago coming to England, and we had in the yeshiva an English phone. Remember those little phones you would have, Nokia phones? So we had regular, one for England with an English SIM card. It was before you knew what SIM cards were. It was an English phone. And I get off the plane in Heathrow, and I turn it on, and it immediately powers down. I'm not going to say which Rebbe from the yeshiva had been there before me and didn't think of powering it up. Now I'm stuck. Before cell phones, the world existed, but now in cell phones, without a cell phone, you're lost. How am I going to even call the taxi? So thankfully in Heathrow, it takes a while to get your bags. So I plugged in my phone and it had more than enough time to fully recharge. But I'm sitting there waiting for my bag, and it starts off, you see the first bag come out, you're anxious, you'll be leaving soon. You go through different stages of baggage, right? And then you start getting yush, it turns into tefillah. And by the time your bag comes out, you're so excited, you forgot everything else in the world, including your phone that's charging. You chop the bag, and you're so excited when the bag comes, the reason like demon, you don't wait for it on the cart. Right? You go, put it on, I'm charging out. And as soon as I get out of the door and see the liquor, I don't know if you know, Minhag HaMakom here in England is that when you walk out of customs, the first thing you see is liquor. Why? For the average English, non-Jew, go an hour and a half without a shot. It's mamish like, gzerish ein hatzibur yochel lamud bo. You know what I'm saying? So I get out, I see the liquor, and immediately I realize the phone. I turn around. Now they have like these revolving doors, but in the old days, there was a person whose job it was to sit by that door. Their one tafkid in life is to go like this. I'm like, you saw me just walk out of there. But I haven't done anything in the meantime. I didn't acquire a bomb. Let me just go back. Can't go back. You hurry Valyavor to go back. It's like Esha Slot. You turn into an Etziv Melach. You know what I'm saying? Mom, you can't go back. I said, look, I'm really stuck. My phone is inside charging. I have no way of communicating with the world. Is it possible, in your good graciousness, you could possibly, she goes, wait here. So now I'm really stuck, in the twilight zone. In Chaim Lamavis. I'm waiting there. After 5 minutes, she comes back with my phone and the recharge. When I said thank you to her, it wasn't the thank you I give to someone who passes the water. It's a thank you that's expressive of the fact that I couldn't help myself. That's real hodah. And that's what we're meant to be expressing when we're modeh to HaKadosh Baruch. The first modeh in modim is admitting that you are the one who sustains us. Therefore, nodeh lecha will thank you for it. Hishtachavoya is a physical expression of dependency, of subjugation. And just to elaborate for a second, our dependency on God for values is meant to be rooted in our appreciation of our dependency upon Him for our very life and sustenance. When you realize that God is sustaining you, it's a lot easier to accept the fact that He's also directing you. And that's why God builds the second off the first. And by the way, if you don't bow when you say modim, your spinal column turns into the first one who told man that he didn't have to rely on God for the knowledge of good and bad. Who was that? The infamous snake, who said to man, third source on page 5, snake said to Chava, you're not going to die. It's really a conspiracy. God knows that the day you eat from the tree, your eyes will be opened and you'll be like Him. and you'll know good and bad on your own, and he's trying to keep you down. Are we meant to be dependent on God? Or are we meant to stand up straight, empowered by the snake, dependent on no one? This idea is expressed in the piyut of Haneros Halalu. I don't know if everyone's ever thought about the piyut of Haneros Halalu. It is interesting and unique that this mitzvah has a song that goes with it. When we put on our tefillin in the morning, we don't sing a song, right? Here we sing a song because it needs to be defined. And it's amazing how little people know about it. Yesterday, I gave a shiur in Manchester. I gave 13 shiurim in Manchester, but one of them, I was asked to give a Gemara shiur. And I said, I don't think your kehillah is interested. No, it has to be a Gemara shiur. Because it has to be on a high level. I said, I think we could handle it. It was a more yeshiva shul. No, it has to be on a high level. So I gave a very high level shiur. I'm not so sure how much, et cetera, right? I said, you got what you asked for, right? So we were talking about, the nace and the milchama. So one of the people in the congregation says, but the Chanukah licht commemorates the Pach Shemen, not the milchama. Of course, it made me question. I said, is that correct? I said, okay. You ever sing Haneros Halalu? He said, absolutely. I said, sing it for us. On the spot, he forgot the tune. Haneros Halalu she'anu madlikin ala nisim v'ala niflos v'ala chuos v'ala milchamos. He got to the word. I said, stop. What did you just say? I said, milchamos. When you go home tonight to sing, think it over. But in any case, the first part of Haneros Halalu talks about why we're lighting the candles, what it's commemorating. The second part begins again, and now it defines the candles. Haneros Halalu kodeshem. Ve'ein lanu reshut lehishtamesh bahem. Does it remind you of a phrase we saw earlier from Chazal? Ein lecha reshut lahayir achareh. There are things above your understanding, above you. The Hanukkah candles are not meant to be about you. There are things beyond you. The Greeks put us in the middle. Hanukkah takes us out of the center. By the way, you're allowed to benefit from the candles. You just can't use them. There's a difference between hana and hishtamshus. We should them speak about this. Again, if you're there and you derive pleasure, that's okay. When you use it for something, basically you're turning the candles into something for you. If you think about this past week's parsha, like Yehuda said to his brothers, "Ma betzakin aroges achinu." What are we going to gain if we kill our brother? Better we should sell him as a slave. At least we'll gain something. This focus on ourselves and what we stand to gain. Ein lanu reshut leishtamesh bahem ela lirotam bilvad. To see something and have it cause you to reflect on things beyond you. Lirotam bilvad kedei lahodot ulahalo. Judaism believes in giving us symbols that remind us of the things that are critical in our lives. Tzitzis, uri'isem otam, uzachartem es kamatos Hashem. The Haneros Halalu, kodeshem, lirosam bilvad, kedei lahodos ulahalo. This is how the Yom Tif of Hanukkah gets established, through Hodah and Hallel that are a response to a conflict with a culture that denies, that it rejects the relevance of being moda to someone or something beyond ourselves. We know. We determine right and wrong, beauty, good, bad. And the truth is, all this is a backdrop to that first critical moment in the morning. Over Hanukkah, people should say Modani with more kavanah. When we wake up in the morning is a terrific opportunity to appreciate why we're alive. If a person wakes up in the morning and they see it as, okay, I went to sleep, I woke up, and I'm moving on with my day, that's one kind of life. If a person wakes up in the morning and those few seconds while their mind is rebooting, you know what I mean? We have those moments we're trying to remember. What day is it? I'm not late to a meeting. Wait a second. Who am I? Those few seconds are a terrific opportunity to realize that our life has been returned to us. It's not natural. And that's where we decide or don't decide what the rest of our day is going to be. Because if we realize that Hechzarta bi nishmati, then kol zman shaneshama bikirbi modani lefanecha. But if we don't take advantage of that opportunity, our identity, religious observance, relationship with God is an overlay as opposed to truly what we feel because our life has been returned to us. So Hanukkah is a time to reflect on the philosophical underpinnings of Hodah that are meant to generate a different type of Hallel. concept, Hodah, that's critical for all of our tefillos, from the first to the last, from Odani to Aleinu L'Shavech. We begin with Hodah, we end with Hodah, and we bow in between. So hopefully this can help us be people who integrate with the world around us, who take the best the world has to offer, who give to the world the best we have to offer, who function as people who are Mekadesh Shem Shamayim. By the way, it's interesting if you look at the tefillah of Al Anisim at the end. I don't know if you've ever noticed this. When we talk about what we're celebrating, I have my sitter here. When we talk about, I don't have the full thing, I skipped the thing, but I'll share just one last thing, which is a beautiful, beautiful concept. If you look at the end of Al Anisim, we say, when we talk about the end, right? Ulecha asita shem gadol v'kadosh ba'olamecha, uliamcha Yisrael asita chua gadolo furkon kayom hazeh. When we talk about what the result was, we say two things: Kiddush Hashem and saving of the Jewish people, which is mentioned first, because that's more important. We're here for that, to be Mekadesh Shem Shamayim. And that's why the Kavu Shmonis Mechana Keilu, Hodos Ulhalel, L'Shimcha Hagadol, Ulecha Asita Shem Gadol, the Kadosh B'Olamecha. Saving us is part of that broader mission of being able to be Mekadesh Shem Shamayim. So we should be people, again, who can be Mekadesh Shem Shamayim in the world. But we can do it when we really have our values to bring to the world. The next edition of HaMizrahi, and how many people read HaMizrahi, the magazine. This one was about Tel Aviv, right? I just wrote about Hanukkah, because Tel Aviv is a wonderful place, but I don't have any Torah on Tel Aviv. The next one is going to be about Or L'Goyim. Or L'Goyim. Concept discussed at length by Yeshayahu Hanavi. If you look in Perek Samach, where he speaks about it, one of the three places, it starts with Kumi Ori Kiva Orich. Right? We have in the Chadodi. It talks about the light that comes from God. We are a light to the nations when we're a moon that reflects the light we receive from God. When we get confused and think that our values come from the nations, we're just a mirror for them. And it's sad when Jews turn into a mirror that reflects what everyone else believes for them. We have a godly, eternal light that can be a guidepost for the world around us. But sometimes we become insecure when not everybody wants that guidepost. And we try to fit ourselves into what they're going to find attractive. You're not shining any light then. You're just a mirror for what people want to see. And so Hanukkah is a time for us to think about this Kiddush Hashem and how we can truly impact the world if we reinforce the values that come from that higher authority. Hanukkah Sameach to everyone. Hanukkah Sameach to everybody on the Zoom. Does anyone have any questions? More? At least one second. We're trying to figure out how to unmute everyone. Maybe you can unmute yourselves. If you have any questions, you can. Oh, there's a chat. Oh, there's a chat. Let's hear what's in the chat. Thanks, better, thanks. Hanukkah Sameach, okay? Hanukkah Sameach to everyone. I think you can unmute yourselves. You can definitely try. Yes. Yes. You're not on the Zoom. You can't ask a question. Yeah. There's no mute button. Yes.
We started off saying something which I thought I also understood, which was that in this historical context, the threat was primarily from our fellow Jews.
Primarily is a tough word, but it was a combination of fellow Jews buttressed by the Greeks.
Yes. In other words, they had adopted, absorbed that culture and liked it and promoted it. And then what becomes less clear to me is the level of antagonism which they then show towards Torah, true Judaism. And it's that issue which in those days led to actual physical conflict.
Right.
How do we then translate that to today? In other words, where is a threat primarily coming from? Is it coming really from the non-Jewish culture which we all get exposed to? Or is it the threat coming from attempts to blur the distinctions.
I think you answered your own question. And that's the sad part. Meaning, when you're trying to reform something, your greatest enemy is the people who refuse to be reformed. And that's why people who try to change orthodoxy are always most angry at the Orthodox. And again, all of us have our beliefs about what's right and wrong, but we need to be able to respect those who are true to their, the traditional beliefs and maybe do it in their way. Doesn't mean that we're wrong, right? But anyone whose opinions are based on the Torah, as understood by Gedolei Torah, there are different Gedolei Torah, that's a legitimate Torah approach. This is a broader issue about Elu ve'elu and knowing to draw lines. Which maybe is another shiur for another time, but we live in a world where there's a lot of opinions, right? Within the Torah world, and a lot of opinions outside the Torah world. What makes an opinion a legitimate way for a Torah true Jew to live? The answer is when Gedolei Torah believe it. Rav Kook writes this in a piece. There was an author who sent Rav Kook an anthology of Jewish philosophy, and he left the Rambam out because he felt the Rambam was not a Jewish philosopher. He was influenced by the Greeks. So Rav Kook responded to him, how can you say such a thing about a philosophy that the Rambam, who was a Gadol b'Torah, had? If he had it, that makes it a legitimate Jewish philosophy. If Soloveitchik believed the path, it makes it a legitimate Jewish philosophy. If Rav Yoel Teitelbaum believed in a path, it makes it a legitimate Jewish philosophy. You have a right to go by your, Gedolei Torah and their path. If no Gedolei Torah had it as a philosophy, then it has no basis. And so that's just as far as the broader pluralism and how we know what's a legitimate Torah approach. There are many people who don't understand that, and they decide what is the correct Torah approach, especially when you're deciding based upon what's in your stomach. It's very easy to reject everybody else because they're not in your stomach. It shocks me every time anew when people who have really no basis for their opinion in Torah are so confident about their opinion that they can reject every Torah opinion as illegitimate. That's a very dangerous thing. And that's a reincarnation of Hellenism.
I saw.
You got an answer to the question yet?
Only to say that it's actually making those kinds of distinctions and recognizing when you perhaps get an authentic opinion coming from perhaps a non-authentic source,
Right.
how you're meant to react to that.
You should try to see value in everything. You should try and learn from everyone, even opinions that don't have Torah basis. We learn from non-Jews too, right? But we know what the standard line is, what a legitimate Torah lifestyle is. We look towards the people who are Torah leaders to give us that guidance. Within Torah, I'm not talking about Das Torah and telling us what to invest in. Torah values come from the leading Torah people. Yeah.
Yes, I saw yesterday interesting thing from Ramesh Shapiro as well about the Gaza and Galeid at the end, and he links it to Hanukkah and Yaf Telekim Liefes, because he said the Greeks, the way the Chachamim were not so, they were upset about what happened with Ptolemy when they translated the Torah, but because Greek is the nearest thing and beauty to Torah, so there's an insight there. But he says what he felt the Greeks were trying to do was Torah is above. It's a different realm. It's a different language. Dibor and Daber, the whole his whole malach, he goes there. That Torah is above everything else. And what the Greeks tried to do was to try to bring Torah down to another subject.
Translated into English.
Yeah,
to Greek.
And basically take it out from that
Torah sechel.
Yeah, from that element to relegate it to an ordinary subject.
I'll share with you, because you mentioned Yegarsa Adusa and Galeid. Everyone knows what he's referring to. Such a powerful Dvar Torah. If you came just for this, you'd appreciate it. Chav Tet in November 29th, 1947. Everybody knows what happened, right? 75 years ago. People were blown away, the Jewish world, just a short time after the Holocaust. They asked Rabbi Herzog, originally from Great Britain, they asked him what he thought about this momentous occasion. I think he was from Scotland. No, where was he from? Ireland. Okay, yeah. Sorry. Okay, but he was from the Commonwealth. I meant the Commonwealth. So they asked him what his thoughts were. The UN vote There were 32 in favor and 13 against, and 12 against. 13 against, 32 in favor, 13 against. He said, look, it was, what parsha was it that week? It was Parshas Vayetze. And he said, Lavan called it Yagar Sa'adusa. The gematria of the first two letters are 13. He said, Yaakov called it Gal Eid. The gematria of the first two letters are 32. Wait a second, we need a minute just to digest that. Whoa.
He said Yagar as well, 213.
Yeah.
He said that was the year they put this pig on the walls of Yerushalayim.
Herzog's is better. Yeah, okay, yeah. Oh, yes, okay. Oh, not all within one's for lot. 1 second. I'll go back here. Okay, 1 second. I'm trying to go forward. Okay, being insecure about one's specialness is legitimate if one is not all in with one's philosophy. Non-Jews have every right to find hypocrisy distasteful. Acting special can stick in the throat of others, fighting one's Jewish. Well, it could be that you want to be sensitive to other people in situations where it could create discord. But the real point is that you yourself are confident and comfortable with yourself. If there are situations where you want to be sensitive, that's one thing. But if it's expressive of the fact that one isn't comfortable in their own skin, then that's problematic. Okay.
Just want to mention, if anyone's taking this away, everyone points out there is shameless on it, so be careful.
Okay.